Good morning. My name is Susan Caskey. I'm one of the division directors for Boulder County Housing and Human Services. Thanks to everyone who's joined the call early this morning. Really appreciate it. HHS is continuing to try to find ways to support our teams during this challenging time, and we're really excited to be able to offer today's presentation and discussion to all county staff. As a reminder, please post your questions and comments in the Q&A section, and we'll get to those at the end. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Janine D'Anniballe. Janine is a licensed psychologist and a nationally recognized expert in sexual assaults and traumatic stress, and currently serves as the Director of Trauma Services and Moving to End Sexual Assaults, otherwise known as MESA, at Mental Health Partners. I have a huge amount of respect for Janine. Not only is she a stellar human being who deeply cares about the health and well-being of our entire community, she also is very, very skilled at bringing to light the impacts of primary, secondary, and collective trauma and how traumatic events disproportionately impact communities of color. We are excited to have her share with us strategies to support our individual and collective resiliency. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that Janine was a champion for introducing a facility dog whose name is Fievel. Fievel works at Mental Health Partners and helps support their very important work in our community. So without further delay, I want to turn it over to Dr. Janine D'Anniballe.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was the very kind words, and good morning, everybody. It is my complete honor to be with you this morning. I really can't think of any place else I'd rather be than just providing this service to the amazing people of our county and talking about the real challenges of this time. And I'm aware, I just want to check that you can see my screen okay. Does that look okay? Because it kind of flashed out for a second. Can you see that?
Janine, are you projecting your PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not seeing it yet. If you'll go ahead and reshare, please.
Reshare, yes, will do. Is it there?
There it is, Janine. Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. Yay. I feel so supported with all these technically savvy people on this call, so thank you. So again, like Susan said, I am the Director of Trauma Services at Mental Health Partners, and really have for the last 20 some years of my career focused on the impact of traumatic stress and cumulative stress on people. And this time of COVID-19, during this pandemic, during this epidemic period of working to fight racism and social injustice, really contributes to what I see as a very complex and cumulative layered time of stress. And this stress ranges from inconveniences that one might experience or occur during this time, all the way up to the trauma of the fear of losing our lives to this pandemic or losing people we love because of the pandemic of COVID. And truly, sometimes it's everything in between, right? And I think all of us are experiencing at some level, right? At some level, just some collective grief over these events and possibly even some anxiety, right? And while I recognize that there's certainly individual differences, there's also some common experience, right? Like I said, from changing our routines and working from different places to all the way up to real fear for our well-being, our livelihoods, right, that carry with it, of course, more stress. So this graphic here really, I think, hopefully tries to capture that. So let's think about stress as this layered effect where we have personal stress that we might be experiencing from feeling more isolated, right? Many of us are working from home. Our lives have become just a little more solitary, right? With ourselves or with our families. And then, like I said, that overhanging this fear of getting sick or people we love getting sick, right? Even just basic acts of going to the grocery store or, you know, going out to run an errand now carries a layer of needing to be cautious or mindful in a way that it never did before, right? Obviously. Then we have the real factors and dynamics related to financial stress, either for us, for our families, for loved ones, right? Community, the loss of jobs, the loss of income, you know, perhaps even loss of our investments, right? For those of us invested. So it really runs the gamut of some financial stress. And then familial stress. I do not know how people have continued to work from home during this pandemic when there's children and other maybe caregiving, caretaking tasks that need to be done in the home. And I want to be really clear that, you know, it's not that we're just working from home. Okay, we use that term a lot. Well, we're working from home. Actually, what we're doing is we're at home working during a pandemic. That's very different, right? That carries with it very different connotations and very different stress levels. So we have to keep that in mind as we work and try to be productive or focused. This isn't simply working from home. So I want to offer that framing. And then particularly for those of us trying to juggle parenting or, you know, homeschooling, like we will soon be in again, right? Or other kinds of caregiving, caring for an older relative or friend. So lot to juggle with familial stress. And then the cultural stress that we're in, you know, the worry about how our community is going to be affected over time. And I'll just give a very, you know, simple example of this, but, you know, there's been some somewhat bolder institutions that have not made it through this pandemic, right? Like the Med restaurant. I mean, I've lived here for 27 years, and you know, the Med was like a cultural institution or different things like that. It's like, how is our community going to change what it looks like in terms of businesses and what's offered here for a while? And then you have all these stressors on top of the news media and news about the pandemic or racial injustice or everything else that we're kind of pelted with every day. So I'm going to really spend some time in this presentation talking specifically about the media news and some thoughts on that in terms of our own resilience. So I hope this, first of all, gives a framework for why we all might feel a little off, and for the people we're serving or working with in this community, right? All of the dynamics that they're working with, and for some more. And that leads me into this next slide to talk about this time as particularly difficult for people with marginalized identities and for marginalized populations. So, and what I mean by that is people who are just experience chronic and systemic oppression. Okay, so homeless people, low income, people of color, you know, hourly workers, or people who have not had the privilege or the luxury of staying home, the elderly, right? I think we can just look at the time of COVID and we know right away who has been most impacted by this pandemic. And that has been older adults and people of color and people who have not been able to socially distance, right? They have to leave home to work. So whether that's healthcare workers or, you know, people who are working in warehouses or public transportation, right? So anybody who kind of doesn't have the privilege that a lot of society affords is going to be more acutely affected by this time. And we're seeing that from a statistical perspective in terms of just who has tested positive for COVID and then all the way up to who has died from COVID. So let's talk a little bit about mental health during this time. So take a look at this slide, which is just really quite remarkable, about a 700% increase of what people are defining as mental distress during this time, as particularly relative to 2018. And if you look at this, wow, look at the group that is at least reporting the most serious mental distress. And it may not be what you might think right off the top, but I think if we really reflect on it, we see it, that age group between 18 to 29 is really feeling the crunch of this, probably because of their outlets and their entertainments, and things are very social and their routines might be the most disrupted, right, as a general rule in that age group. So that's a lot. That's a lot of increase of people reporting distress. A little more data around that. In April, 70% of Americans were reporting moderate to severe mental distress, and 1,000% increase in contacts to the government's distress hotline. So no surprise, I'm sure, to any of you. And then we have to remember that safer at home, which is a term we've used right throughout the pandemic, stay at home, safer at home, is really not always safe for some people. So people who are in abusive situations are definitely not safer at home. And during this time, you know, we're seeing a very concerning trend in terms of child abuse reports going down, which is concerning. And we know largely that's probably because most people are not having eyes on children to identify abuse, right? Who might normally report that or be mandated to do something about that. And instead, children are more isolated. And then an increase in domestic violence calls, and not only calls. In my conversations with our local domestic violence programs here, it's not only an increase in calls, but the calls they're getting are more lethal in nature. So very concerning. And then we have this link between an economic downturn and depression, right? So if we go back and we look at the data at the last time we had a recession, right, which 2007 to 9, for every percentage point increase in unemployment, we saw a corresponding 1.6% increase in suicide rate. So obviously kind of a link there. And something to be mindful of as financial times get hard, particularly with some of the added benefits of unemployment now running out. I think we're at the place where they're running out, that extra amount that was being given on unemployment. So there's going to be some changes, I think, coming with the economic kind of state that we've been in too. And then another piece is the increased substance use during this time, right? We know that oftentimes alcohol or other substances have tend to increase when there's more anxiety for people, and especially people who have a history of substance use issues or challenges, right? And it's very concerning because a lot of times people start using substances because of the feeling of being disconnected or isolated. So now in a pandemic, when that is kind of what is being called for, right, is to kind of distance more, not gather in large groups, not convene in the way we're used to convening. Those traditional support systems are not there as readily available, right? And then you combine that with more unemployment, the loss of structure and routine of this time, and then maybe even simply just some boredom, all can kind of combine to have more substance use. I think I haven't heard a recent statistic on this, but I know back in May, the statistic I heard was a 40% increase in alcohol use, but across the general public. So super concerning, and super concerning about, as this pandemic goes on. And in particular, as we start to head into the fall, right, in winter, when we have less sunlight or opportunity for other kinds of outdoor connection starts to decrease. The HHS secretary estimates that this recession from the pandemic will lead to more than 65,000 deaths from either drug overdose, alcohol, and suicide. So the pandemic-related kind of tragedies, if you will, are not just people who get COVID, right, and who die from COVID, but these behavioral health kind of side effects of this time as well. And I'm just going to pause here for a moment because I'm very aware that what I'm sharing is heavy, right? And this is not good news. Like, there's no way to sugarcoat this, right? This is not good news. This is not good time. And I want to just say, hang in there, because where I'm getting to is to offer how we cope, how we deal, how we cultivate our own resilience during this time. So just hang with me. Okay, this is a bleak picture to start, but I want to also make sure that we have this framework and we understand what's happening from a mental health, right, perspective and the impact of all this stress. So along those lines, we have to know that we're going to be affected and we're going to have responses to this trauma and cumulative stress. Now, sometimes we're going to get through it just fine. We're going to use our coping skills and our resilience building skills, but how do you know when it's time to really seek help, right? Either for yourself or for people you care about. And this is just maybe a quick way to really think about that, persistent nightmares, or being really jumpy or vigilant, feeling like the joy is gone from life and not able to engage in usual activities that one might enjoy, feeling upset or fearful, and that there's tension and suffering in important relationships. So this is just a good framing to know that, while this is normal, I want to really stress, if you or anybody is experiencing this, it is not because you are weak and that you can't deal, or, whatever, you're too sensitive to what's going on. Okay, this is real. What we're going through is heavy. Okay, and if this is affecting us in this way, there is no shame. there is no shame, okay? But it does maybe just say, okay, we might need a little extra support. And if we fall into this category, this is a time to think about some additional support. So all of this stress, right, takes a toll on our nervous system. Sometimes we think of trauma as these like big one-time event things that happen, like these discrete, what I call shock traumas. And that's certainly one form of trauma. But actually, our worldview and our nervous systems are really quite impacted with the buildup of everyday smaller events of stress, and particularly when they layer, right? Just like this graphic, it piles. And to our nervous system, a bunch of small stressful events, right, building can be the same as one really large scary event. So neurobiologically, they're very similar. So with that framing, here's just some more normal response to that stress, right? And as I look at this list, I mean, I see myself in, you know, almost all of them. And just being a little more anxious, irritable, okay, like a little more shorter fuse, eating or sleeping being off, right? Maybe eating more out of emotion or not being hungry at all. Trouble sleeping, trouble staying asleep. Being forgetful and just a little absent-minded. And I think this week, you know, I was aware, I asked my staff like this one question 3 times, like within a week, and they kept telling me the answer and I just couldn't retain it. I couldn't retain the information that I was being given. So feeling out of sorts, sad. We talked about increased use of substance, and then just more somatic issues, right? Common to have headaches or stomach aches or just feeling more tense, particularly in our head or neck, shoulders areas. Also back is a place where we carry it. So all that is normal. All that is very, very normal. So just again, not judging ourselves, trying not to judge ourselves or others, right? And just putting it in the context of this time. And then, of course, we have very individual responses with this, right? So some people during this time could be feeling really productive and really efficient at work, getting stuff done, you know, able to execute projects, and frankly are doing just fine, if not thriving, right, in this way of operating. And then there could be other people that are struggling, you know, the exact opposite, maybe not able to focus, feeling like you're in front of your computer all day, but you're just not getting much done. And it really varies based on, I mean, certainly individual differences, but oftentimes people with kind of what I call pre-existing trauma or other pre-existing stressors, right? It just makes more sense that this time could be triggering all that old stuff, right? That some of the dynamics could be feeling like a loss of control that could really be coming from maybe some old traumas that's getting re-triggered now. So if I am in that state of past traumas being triggered by this current collective trauma, right? Probably I'm almost certain I'm going to be less productive, focused, maybe have a diminished ability to feel regulated emotionally. And then of course we can have other responses to this traumatic stress or secondary traumatic stress, which is this, right? Just denial and dismissal and avoidance, right? So I'm fine. It's not a problem. It's no big deal. Okay, we can also go there. And frankly, sometimes some of this is slightly helpful, but if we stay there, right, then we know that's not so helpful. And more often than not, it catches up with us in some way. So I offer this graphic again here, and I'm going to share this PowerPoint, and I'm happy for Susan and HHS to distribute this in any way that they would like. But, you know, this graphic here just talks about a trauma exposure response, right? And all the, again, I'm going to really stress this, normal responses that might come along with this. And you'll see it's a lot of it I talked about, but it's just helpful to refer to put it in context of what you might be experiencing, somebody maybe you're supervising, that you're working with, or even a family member, right? Put it in the context of this current time. I want to take a minute and hang on, let me go back here 1 second before I key up that next slide. So one of the things that happens to our brain and to our bodies during this time when the stress is so constant and chronic. I mean, let's just take, for example, you know, what's happening with the school districts. I so feel for these people trying to make these decisions about schools and the no-win situation that this is, right? And for parents who are on the other end of, we have a plan, the plan changes, we're not sure of the plan, we can't plan. So the impact, I think, that has, just things like that, the uncertainty is our brain starts to prime for something called the negativity bias. And we start looking and preparing for everything that's going wrong, right? Or everything that's uncertain, everything that's changing. And then the next thing you know, we're not doing very well, right? Because we're kind of, this sense of negativity or uncertainty is pervading us, okay? That's a real phenomenon, and it's called the negativity bias. So I'm just going to show this short video, and we'll give a minute. So start this.
Hey, Janine, I think that others can't hear.
Oh, yeah,
the video.
Yeah, I wonder.
Sorry about that. So we may want to start this over.
Okay.
And
Whoops, Susan, you froze on me there.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure how to troubleshoot this on how to make sure that people can hear the video as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's okay. It's very short. It's only 2 minutes, and I'm happy to kind of talk us through it. Because really, this slide really captures the essence of the video, and I'll speak to it. So our brains, right, are trained to look for danger, to look for things that are wrong, and there's real scientific data that says that the negative sticks with us way more than the positive. Okay, so, and we know, if any of us who have ever had a performance evaluation at work, right? Your supervisor, your boss probably is telling you things, and probably 90% of them are things that you're doing well, and, you know, amazing things you've done and strengths you have. And then there's one thing that says, you know, well, I think you want to work on being more punctual and, you know, just more prompt. And then we leave the evaluation and all we're thinking about is, oh my gosh, I got to get it together. I'm terrible. I'm always late, right? And I'm not organized. And then there we go, right? Just like this cartoon says, it's like, oh, you're free. Okay, here's all your faults. And that's what's sticking with us. And the research says, what's interesting in that video, that it says we actually need 3 positive experiences for our brain to be able to counter the negative. And as it relates to relationships, so in interpersonal relationships, we actually need 5 to 1. So it just shows that then if what we're exposing ourselves to during this time is negative, 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 we are going to start to go down a rabbit hole of negativity. It's common, it makes sense, but how do we get out of it, right? So first step is we want to assess, how are we doing? Okay, are we in the hole of the negativity bias? Are we going there at work? Are we going there in our personal lives due to all this overwhelming stress? Okay, and there's one tool that I want to offer here, and some of you may have heard of this. It's called the Professional Quality of Life Scale, that is aimed at professionals. And it has a little bit of a bias to people who are in the helping professions, okay? And that's very broad, okay? Helping profession can be, you know, law enforcement. It could be an attorney. It could be a caseworker, a therapist, right? It's very broad. Anybody who's trying to help other people. And it's broken down to measure things like, am I feeling compassionate and satisfied in my job, or am I fatigued and burning out and have secondary trauma? It's a very great survey. The best part of this, it's free. Here's the links. It's self-scoring. There's a Spanish version and English. And it just, like, here's some sample questions, you know, because of my helping, I felt on edge about various things. Or, you know, I feel depressed because of the traumatic experiences of the people I help. Or I have beliefs that sustain me. So it's a really good tool to do what I call just some self-reflection of, how am I doing during this time? You know, has that negativity bias and or the secondary trauma or the burnout, has that kind of got a hold of me here, right? And this could be something great to talk with your supervisor at work, or to just really kind of take inventory of where we are. So I offer that as a tool. And then moving in to where I really want to focus now in this kind of second part of the presentation is, how do we go about, you know, challenging that negativity balance or negativity bias and building our resilience, okay? Because this is a lot. And let me just be clear about something. This is a marathon, okay? It's not a sprint. I don't know about you, but at Mental Health Partners, when we essentially closed down, went remote. I mean, closed down the physical offices, started remote services. I mean, it's funny now, but in my head, I'm like, okay, we're gonna close it down 2 weeks. Be back in work in 2 weeks, and everything's back to normal. And here we are, 5 months later, and frankly, with no clear end in sight, right, of this and this new normal we're in. So it's a marathon, and we have to really look at what we are doing to cultivate our resiliency during this time, and how we are maintaining and trying to reconnect to our best selves in the face of kind of unprecedented, frankly, challenge. And notice I'm using the word resilience versus self-care. Okay, I personally, this is my little 2 cents. I don't love the term self-care. I mean, I know what it means. I know what it means, and I know the intention. But to me, self-care feels like it's like an act, like one behavior that we do. I took a nice long bath. Okay, that's nice. That's a good act to recenter, and I love that. And if you like baths, you should do it. But I see resilience as more a strategy that really builds our capacity. It builds capacity to recover from difficulties more quickly. Okay, it's just our ability to bounce back quicker. And it's a protective factor, right? It can kind of be our consistent home base of neurobiological reset to go out and deal with the next challenge. Okay, so again, it's a consistent practice versus one-time kind of behaviors. Now, those one-time behaviors are good. I'm not saying don't do those, but it's bigger than that. Okay, and I'm going to talk about what that might look like. So first of all, I'm going to start with what we can do at work. So some workplace strategies for resilience. So one of the challenges of this time, right, is that we're isolated. So how are we making time or building in opportunities for debriefing about stressful things? Okay. Are we doing that? Are we making time to do that? If we have a really stressful meeting, here's the difference. Like, let's say that stressful meeting is like from 4 to 5 or 4 to 5:30 or whatever, right? You get off the virtual meeting, you hit end meeting, and the next thing you know, you're just home in your kitchen or in your spare bedroom, right, wherever you are, and you're dealing with all of that stuff from that meeting, and there's no coworker to just process that with or transition in that way, right? So we have to have ways that we build in to make sure we are debriefing and kind of, for lack of a better word, like cleansing that, right, from our systems and resetting so that stress doesn't carry into our evening time. Certainly I talked about the use of EAP, right? If we noticed that we were feeling that one slide I said is a sign of when we might need extra help, and we're reaching out for that. And then making sure whenever possible that we are trying to find some balance in the intensity of the work where possible. Now, for some of you out there, this isn't necessarily possible. Okay, think of the child welfare people. It's not like the child welfare people can stop you know, working with children who have been abused, right? But is there a way to, you know, build in something else in that work, to find a little space in that work, even if it's a half day of doing something slightly different or can still be productive, but it gives a buffer from the intensity of the work during this time. I mean, it's critical. It's critical, especially now. And then we know we need to know about this, just what I'm doing now, right? You're already equipped with some knowledge about traumatic stress and collective trauma, and making sure that we're bringing this into people that we're onboarding or supervising, right? This framework is so important. And I know there's some departments that talk about this a lot, and I will call out HHS. I think there's been an effort to kind of look at this, but are we, you know, are we doing it as much as we can and need to? And then making sure that we have a work culture that is taking time to counter the negativity bias, right? And what's one thing off the bat is this sense of gratitude and appreciation for what is working. You know, many of us in our jobs, all we're about all day is like solving problems, right? There's problems and there's issues, and we're working to fix them and help. And it's easy, right, to focus. So, but what is working? You know, how are we showing appreciation? And when I say in all directions, I'm not just talking about you who are supervisors or directors or managers showing appreciation for your staff. I'm talking about staff showing appreciation for their managers or their agency, right? And like sitting in and swimming in that gratitude and appreciation, if you will. And I love this graphic here. I mean, you know, even when we're remote, like, are we still like taking time to show that, you know, kudos and appreciation? That's what builds resilience. This is our protective factor against these immense challenges, right? And then let's talk a little bit about individual strategies. Okay, so a little bit of neurobiology. We know that stress / anxiety that can come from the stress, right? We kick into our sympathetic part of our autonomic nervous system. And the sympathetic system is valuable, okay? Right now, I'm talking to you, you know, I'm managing this technology. My sympathetic system, I'm reacting, I'm alert, I'm focused, and it's helpful. It's helpful, it's serving me right now, right? The problem is we can't stay in that mode all the time, or our nervous system will fray. Okay, we have to make sure we're balancing it by kicking in this other part of the autonomic nervous system, which is the parasympathetic system, so we can actually take time to not react and respond and relax and be intentional. Okay, so we have to be able to transform here. And this is harder when we're, you know, at home working, or we have additional stresses that we probably didn't even foresee, like homeschooling, you know, or something like that. So how do we do that? One very key, and the research is very clear about one thing that helps, is kind of a mindfulness practice, okay? And meditation is one example of a mindfulness practice, but it is not the only example. And I love this slide because, to me, this is my favorite slide, I think, of all time of PowerPoint presentation. So this is me right here, and that's my dog, Fievel. And this is what we do when we go for a walk. I mean, look at my head, right? Thinking, planning, strategizing, worrying. And I'm seeing and hearing everything else in my head. And what Fievel sees are the trees and the sun and the smell of the squirrel. And it's like mindful versus mindful. And I think our resiliency depends upon how effectively we can practice to get out of mindful into mindful. So easily said than done. Okay, this is where dogs have it way over on us. But let's look at the neurobiology of just what it does for a 1 minute, right, mindfulness exercise. We can start thickening the cerebral cortex, okay? And you're like, well, what's the big deal about thickening the cerebral cortex? It's a huge deal, because when this part of our brain is more activated and robust, it can kind of quiet the lower brain that's more on edge, anxious, reactive, unregulated, okay? So it's actually like lifting weights for this part of your brain so that the other part of the brain can like quiet down, right? Quiet down the anxious chatter and the high alert, particularly when we don't need it, okay? So it can serve to help our attention span and restore synapses, right? Similar to like taking a nap. So a 1 minute mindfulness, right, exercise could just be looking out the window and seeing a little backyard songbird and watching that bird, doing nothing but watching that bird for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, right? That's all. A minute is enough to reset some of our brain. Another piece. This cannot be understated, how important it is to start our mornings mindfully. And I'll call myself out here, okay? When I wake up, my alarm goes off, I'm laying in bed. Sometimes one of the first things I do is pick up my phone and look at email. Okay, what happened the time I signed off to this morning? I'm not even out of bed yet. I don't know if anybody else does that, but I'll out myself with that, okay? All the research tells us that we will not be as resilient during the day if we start off our morning rushed, overloaded, or stressed, particularly those first 30 minutes when we open our eyes, okay? And the importance of kind of transitioning into our day. And so I'd encourage you to think about your current morning routine and maybe ways to practice a more mindful morning. So these are just some strategies that you know I have tried and try to use that make a huge difference in the way I feel through my day. So I work on preparing everything the night before. So in the morning, I'm not rushing to make breakfast or make my lunch, you know, just do a little gentle stretching when I get out of bed, and maybe hydrating, right? We can, especially here, we can dehydrate through the night. So maybe a nice, good glass of water to start the day. And then this is key, not jumping to devices, right? Not picking up the phone, not going right to device and start reading the news or the email. Our brains are in a vulnerable state when we wake. Okay, we're transitioning from a different state, and we don't want to start our day primed for stress, anxiety, or worry. Believe me, that's going to probably come more throughout the day, right? So what can we do in those first 30 minutes that might be a different start to our day? So something to think about. You know, engaging in anything where we're being mindful. And again, mindful means doing one thing at a time on purpose, paying attention to that without judgment. So notice these people in this picture, right? They're doing, all these are, you know, different versions of mindful practices. Notice what they're not doing. They are not multitasking. Okay, they're doing what they're doing and doing just that and being fully present in that. And I think when we engage in that, what this does is it lets the brain rest. It lets our synapses kind of clear out and, you know, just have the good kind of neurotransmitters and hormones circulate in the brain versus the stress hormone of multitasking. So how can we incorporate mindful practices? This is going to look different for everybody, okay? It might be one of these examples here. It may not be. It doesn't matter. It could be praying. It could be meditating. It could be walking. It could be drawing, right? But just doing that one thing at a time. Speaking of something important for resiliency, the importance of sleep and rest. Now, the hard part here is when we get stressed, sometimes sleep is the first thing to go. Okay, some people can sleep a lot during stress and some of us can't. Okay, but when we don't sleep, excuse me, our nervous system kind of stays on high alert. Cortisol stays elevated in the body. It doesn't get a chance to like rebalance and clear out, right? Cortisol is one of the most known and most talked about stress hormones, right? And if we're not resting and sleeping, cortisol stays kind of pulsing through our bodies. And cortisol is actually good in the short term, okay? When we have a million balls in the air, it's actually cortisol that's helping us keep all the balls in the air, right? Of getting the kids to this place and fixing the hot water heater that broke, and you know, like it's cortisol that's helping us do all these things. But if we're doing all these things all the time and not resting, we don't get the chance for the other good neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine that are linked to anxiety and depression, right? We don't get them a chance to kind of rebalance in a good way to keep us more emotionally regulated. So if you're sleeping well, disregard anything like go to the restroom or get something, because you don't have to listen to this next slide, right? If you're not sleeping well, some tips about sleep hygiene. So just as it's important to start your day mindful, it's just as important to end your day mindful and without electronics. Now this might seem like, oh my God, you know, can I not, you know, read my Kindle? I think that's okay, actually, if you read Kindle. I'm talking more about television or social media kind of things, or email or things like that, right? We need our system has to unwind before we can actually go in bed and sleep. Okay, so maybe experiment with that. Avoiding caffeine or alcohol 4 to 6 hours before bed. I think there's this myth that like if we drink, particularly alcohol, that'll help us sleep, but actually the research says that it might help us fall asleep, but it often doesn't help us stay asleep, right? Just reserving that bed for sleep or sex, and that's it, right? Not working from bed, certainly not, you know, looking at electronics from bed. That's the vehicle we rest in, right? So that's like keeping those activities like sleep or sex in the bed, everything else out. And then investing in nice bedding, right? Comfortable pillows, comfortable sheet, you know, where we feel like it's like nice to go and actually get in bed. So just a few tips. It can't be overstated, the importance of sleep in our resilience, because I'm sure I'm not alone. You know, if I have like a couple crappy nights of sleep, oh my gosh, you know, that catches up and I'm not my best self at work for sure, or with anybody else for that matter. Okay, how we doing? Let's see, 9:25. Okay, I want to really talk about media, social media, television, news, right? During this time of pandemic, epidemic, social injustice, and all the cumulative stress. So, how many of you have heard a phenomenon called doom scrolling? This is a relatively new term, and as soon as I show you this cartoon, I think you'll understand. So this woman getting ready for bed, she's like, bedtime in quarantine, let's turn off the lights, get cozy, and then she reaches for her phone and she doom scrolls. Okay, so what is that? It's kind of this automatic behavior, right? Where we are driven by this instinct of like, I have to know what's going on. I have to know what's going on. And this might have been the case normally, but then you have the pandemic situation, right? And it's all amplified. And we have to know that many of our news platforms and social media platforms are designed, like the algorithms in these applications are designed to reinforce our patterns, right, of what we're looking at. So what that means is if we're trying to find information about the pandemic and this, we're just going to keep seeing feeds of more bad news. And then before you know it, we're literally binging on the bad news. And our negativity bias is there. Our nervous system is in a heightened state of high alert. Okay. So how do we stay informed, right? But we don't doom scroll, because being overwhelmed by this situation doesn't serve us. Okay, fine line. Being informed, getting overwhelmed. So first, change your screen display, right? Have it in grayscale, like, and not be so visually alluring or intense. Retrain your algorithms in your feeds by clicking on content that covers, you know, a wide variety of topics, right? So maybe cooking recipes or hikes, right? Not just COVID deaths or, you know, who can carry COVID, right? Because then there it goes, right? There it goes. Set a timer to bring you out of that state. Like, I'm going to read for 10 minutes and breaking that cycle and ending on something positive, right? Whether it's as simple as, for me, I go to ESPN and although the sports news right now is dominated by COVID news too, but I'll check the box score from my favorite baseball team, right? That gets me out of doom most of the time. So monitor your consumption, right? I think, we're prone to look for danger. So we're looking for danger. So maybe we turn off the notifications for our news feeds, or removing the social media apps from your phone entirely. And then it's not an automatic thing that while you're standing in line at King Supers that you're checking Facebook and then you see something unpleasant and there it is. You're not perhaps prepared for it, right? Unfollow people if necessary and keep perspective, right? There is goodness in the world. There is joy. there are hopeful things, right? But our negativity bias takes over and it's easy to lose track. Oh wait, hang on, I gotta key up this next slide. Probably one of the most important things that we can do is identify the things that bring us joy, hope, or a sense of calm, and do them, okay? And reconnect to the beauty. For me, one of my strategies during this time of the pandemic is, for those of you who know me, I am a huge animal person, right? And the time with my animals has been really quite amazing. And so this is an unabashed share of that, right? These are my, this is my family here. And including Susan mentioned Fievel, who's the facility dog with me at Moving to End Sexual Assault. He's the yellow lab here with his working vest. So not only, right, can they serve as a beautiful mindfulness activity and just watching and observing, right, and finding joy, just what it does to our blood pressure, right? Connecting with animals. We're not allowed right now. We're supposed to be minimizing touch, social distancing, right? But we need touch. Touch actually lowers our cortisol. So how can we get good consensual touch? Well, doesn't necessarily have to be with humans, right? So this is unabashed sharing here. And just finding things. So you'll see my cat Yogi, who's the Grand when he's very good friends with my pit bull mix. They're very close, and there's just something about that connection and pulling out, I think, of our head of worry and fear and pandemic that's been incredibly helpful for me personally. This may or may not work for you, but I think just sometimes looking at something positive can help, right? For some people, it could be babies or children, or the next piece is the benefit of connecting with nature, right? Where there is life and there is hope and there is, development and growth. And I mean, if we're fortunate enough and we're able to really go outside or to a national park or open space, that's great. But we don't even need that. We can, again, look out our window and find a tree. Or, plant a pot of annuals and having it there and just the beauty and the color. Again, these serve as beautiful mindfulness tools, right? And the thing about nature is it pulls us out of, it connects us to a sense of something bigger than ourselves. Some people can also get this with other spiritual practices, right? Where there's a sense of, I'm connected to something greater. Okay, for me personally, nature does that, right? All of a sudden I look at that goldfinch and the miraculousness of that yellow and all of a sudden it puts things in perspective to me, that my stress about this meeting that I got to have tomorrow, right, is just a little bit smaller, just a little bit. Yeah, we're so fortunate, right, to live where we have this in this community. But again, even if we can't access trails or a hot air balloon, right, just noticing flowers and growth. All these are resilience building factors, and these are practices, right? This is not something you do once. This is building these ways of being and appreciation in to counter the negativity and the stress. Shoot, you can't hear sound, so I can't play this video for you. It's fun, but you'll see here, these are actually the 3 county commissioners, right? In this jib jab video along with me, and we were gonna do a fun video because this also speaks to, we have to remember to have lightness, right? The ability to laugh, to be silly, and to just remember, right, to kind of bring lightness in. And whatever that is for you, it could be watching a funny video or connecting with somebody who really makes you laugh. Because we are at risk for being uber serious right now. This is a serious time. Okay, but we need reprieve, we need balance from that so that we can come back to meet that seriousness with our best self. And of course, knowing that we have an amazing community filled with resources. There's so many, these are just a few. So MESA is the Sexual Violence Resource Center in Boulder County. That's where I'm the director. Please know that's there. Of course, Mental Health Partners is open and taking clients and always available. And then of course, the Colorado Crisis Services that we have. And so many, I mean, the county has done an amazing job with these partnership calls and putting out resources to the community. So I feel like we're fortunate to have a lot of resource. However, the best resource that we have is ourselves and how we cultivate our resiliency. We normalize our experience of this time of stress without judgment. And we do something every day, right, to counter the negativity. And so we don't get sucked down the rabbit hole of doom. Okay, and we're keeping balance and perspective in our practices. And with that, we have a little time. So Susan, I'll leave it to you if there's any questions, comments, thoughts.
There's just, Janine, first of all, thank you so much. This was amazing, and I learn something new from you every time I hear you present. So it's just such an important topic. And I also want to appreciate everyone who's been posting on the chat, both kind of sharing pretty vulnerable information, which is so important. I think it helps to normalize what we're all going through to varying degrees, and also kind of helping to support different types of strategies. So thanks to everybody. So such good information, Janine, again, and really sobering at the beginning, the sobering information, and just incredible detail around some of the resiliency strategies. So thank you again. I actually want to start with a comment, and then we're going to go into some questions. So a comment was posted that said, this is all really helpful, but seems like a pretty privileged perspective. Some folks are not able to rest because of systemic oppressions that are experienced every day. Many are active in Black Lives Matter protests in addition to dealing with COVID and other fallout from the inequities that are happening as a result of COVID. I don't know if you want to speak to that comment, yep. Janine.
Well, I think it's absolutely right. I mean, rest is a privilege. It just is, and so it's absolutely right on. And I guess, and I would offer that even those of us who are continually fighting against inequities, right? It's not going to serve to deplete ourselves, right? So we need breaks. Everybody needs breaks, and yes, it's like for some people who feel like they can't take a break, I can appreciate that, right? Because these are huge issues, and it doesn't mean stepping away and stopping. It just means maybe the break is just time to breathe and reset, right? And so it is definitely privileged to have the luxury, right, to reset our nervous systems. But one of my mentors who is very active in the Black Lives Matter and doing a lot of work in the social injustice, her words to me were, I fight like hell, and then I take a breath and rest. I fight like hell and take a breath and rest. And to me, that is, that has to be part of the picture too, right? Because we don't want our leaders, our activists, those of us who are doing this work to fry. So I think it's a great point. It is a privileged position, and it's still important to some degree to cultivate that reset into the fight.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much, Janine.
Yeah.
All right. So the first question. Thanks so much, Shannon, for posting this. I live alone, no partner, in a bedroom apartment, etc. When Sunday night comes, I get depressed because it feels like I have to be on my computer alone all week without in-person coworkers, and I'm not doing well with all that. It feels like I'm in solitary confinement, chained to my computer, and also communication with staff is hard, being all online. Things get confusing, too many emails, etc. It gets very stressful. It's like all problems and no joy anymore. Not sure what to do without in-person contact.
Oh, that's heavy. And thank you so much to the person who brought that forward. That's heavy. And I could feel the heaviness in there, and frankly, on a lot of levels, relate to that, and I've heard other people. So other than what I've mentioned in terms of, some of the practical things about taking time away from screens and rebalancing, right? I do think it's important to think about how, if any in-person contact on a work-related situation is possible. Now, that may not always be possible, right? But might it be possible to do one of the meetings or one of the things you have to do outside in a socially distant way with masks? I don't know. I don't know who that person is or what they do. I know that for me, I have supervision meetings, and we have set up that we're doing the supervision meetings outside, in person, socially distanced with masks. And I don't know how long we're going to be able to do that, right, with the weather and whatnot. But we're very careful to not talk about confidential information during that time, right? It's things like that. But at least that is one meeting out of my day that, one, I'm not in front of a computer, right? I'm not chained to a screen, and I'm having some relational contact with someone. And it just might be 1 or 2 meetings like that a week, but I would just offer that. Is there any opportunity for that? The other thing I would offer is that you mentioned, the person mentioned something like, it's a lot to track. There's more emails, right? That's how communication is coming. It's all through, and it's hard to stay on top of everything. And I just want to say, give yourself a break with that. Like, there is a lot of information coming in, and it's okay to feel like you're not on top of every single thing, and that, to not have that optimal level of function, gotta function. It's like, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to organize my day in the best way I can. But it can feel really hard to keep up. So I would also suggest taking breaks away from the computer during the weekday. Is it possible to structure your day and chunk it out where you're on the computer, take a break, get back on, take a break, and we're not just meeting after meeting after meeting on a screen. So those are just little tips that come to mind. I don't have any great magic, unfortunately, but little things might be worth considering.
That's great, Janine, and we've definitely heard from the county commissioners and Jana Peterson, our county administrator, about really wanting to support all staff with flexibility in their day. So I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
So the next question is, I mean, you talked a little bit about this, but I think I just want to make sure we're asking all the specifics. How do you balance the desire to be informed and all the stress from the pandemic exacerbating regular concerns? Some want to turn off the news to take care of their stresses mentally and emotionally, but we also don't want to become uninformed.
Right. So here's I'll share my strategy, and this is what I'm doing, and because I feel the same way. So I have 1 or 2 sources that I look to for the news, right? One local, and then one more national. I take my sources through print media versus through television, because I feel a little more in control of print media versus images or maybe some stories that are maybe more on the outlier, that are I don't know, that can tend toward more extreme examples of things. So personally, I do not consume via visual media, and I go print media. I stick to 2 sources. I read when I feel most able to take in the information and assimilate it. So according to my presentation, not in the morning, not late at night, right? So a time when I feel like I can take it in. And if I actually then read something, I need to talk to someone about it. So I might read it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to see what Susan thinks about this. So I'm like, Susan, I just read this, and did you see this article? Let's talk about it, right? So I want to do it at a time where I have the ability to do that, and then I limit it. Like, that's it. I feel like I'm up to speed with what's happening, maybe with the school district decision, and maybe I'm up to speed with the rates of where we are with the infection, and that's it. So limit time of day, stick to sources, and personally, I prefer print media. I feel much more in control of it than I do taking it via social media or the television. That's where I feel less in control of that, and I feel more pelted by that information, whereas I'm actively consuming it in the other direction.
Thanks, Janine. So the next question, again, related to kind of exposure to information about COVID, or the onslaught of information around that, is my job is COVID related. So I'm thinking and dealing with COVID and employee needs all the time. Everyone talks about COVID all the time, my kids, spouse, neighbors. I'm having trouble having any part of my day spent without COVID on my mind. My question is, what tips do you have that could help me have some breathing space from COVID, or is that not possible?
Fantastic question. So I can't imagine, right? Yeah, you must feel like it's 24/7. If this is your job, everybody's talking. I can't imagine. My suggestion would, first of all, it is okay and encouraged for you to set boundaries around it. So whether it's something as simple as, you're going to have a socially distant walk with a friend, or having dinner with your family, and just suggesting that, could we make an agreement for this time that this is a COVID-free zone? COVID-free zone. Or, if anybody has something specific, we'll take like the first minute or first 5 minutes, and then we're really gonna pivot off of it. And this is COVID-free time. And that you are really carving time to realize there's other things happening in the world, right, that can connect to hope or joy or progress. I think those breaks, I mean, I can relate to that question. As the director of Moving to End Sexual Assault, I deal with sexual violence all the time. and it's heavy. And sometimes people ask me questions and I'll be out, oh, can I ask you about a friend? And sometimes I am just having to set some boundaries and be like, I want this time together to be free of this content, and encourage you to set that and take control of it. Doesn't make you mean or unempathic. It's healthy.
All right, so the next question is, how do you cope with a breakup during the pandemic?
That's a nightmare. Okay, let's just be clear, because one of the pieces that's profound in the heartbreak of a pandemic or of a breakup is the loneliness, right, and isolation, and that's exacerbated by, we're socially distanced, and oh my gosh, then there's probably some other practical pieces in there too, but so I think it's difficult, and I think it's even more important that there is an active seeking out of social support. And even if that means it's virtual social support, in person, appropriately distanced social support, but something, because otherwise it's going to feel like I'm alone in this pandemic. Now I'm broken up. It's just that all that feelings of loneliness is going to be so exacerbated. So I think relentlessly putting structure and routine for social connection into your day and into your week. So you have something, right? Even if it's a socially distanced coffee with your friend, with a friend, or a virtual support group or something where there's connection.
Thanks, Janine. So the next question, in reference to those employees who have experienced previous trauma, who are most likely having a harder time being productive during the pandemic, as a supervisor, what kind of support would the county offer to support these employees? And this is actually probably for me. So Jana did do a presentation for managers and supervisors last week that went through the support around kind of supporting individual trauma or mental health that's needed. And Janine did list one of the things on her slide, which is EAP. So like this presentation, we are trying to provide as much as we can and get creative about how to support employees. So if you weren't able to be on that call last Monday, if you're a supervisor or manager, that was recorded. And then I think that information is going to be shared across the county. And if not, we can ask Jana to do that. And again, it goes into much more detail around the different types of supports for employees. So we'll get that out to everyone as soon as we can. Okay. I think that is all of, I'm sorry, I was missing a couple questions here. So Janine, do you have any suggestions or strategies for short mindfulness practices for students who have in-person classes during COVID to reduce stress and triggers? Would like some insight on this and how to overcome these triggers and barriers to not learning, listening, engaging, etc.
Yeah, so my go-to for the regulation kind of quick strategies, you cannot ever, in my opinion, beat some slow, mindful, diaphragmatic breath, right? So just like truly, just some belly breathing, right? So inhaling, filling the belly, bringing air, up to the upper part of the chest, and then exhale slowly and completely, right through the nose. 3, 4, 5 breaths like that can do more to reset our nervous system than almost anything. The other things would be to just exaggerate, right? Like exaggerate the stress, bring the shoulders by the ears and scrunch up, and then exhale and move the shoulders down, right? Feel a softening of the shoulders. So just a few times like that where we tense and then release. And then we realize, oh, okay, that's what it feels like to be released. And then other tips of just, like I said, finding something to notice for 1 minute, whether it's the bird outside, whether it's, you know, I have a mask, my mask that I've been wearing, and somebody made this for me, and it's really pretty, and it's got all these colors. So it just might be that I do a little mindfulness on the mask, notice the colors, notice the shapes in it, right? Just immerse myself in something to calm my brain, because when I'm doing that, I can't be spinning in my head, right? So these are just like really quick 1 minute resets that I would recommend.
All right. So the next question, I'll turn it over to you, Janine, to answer, and then I can also answer some pieces of this as well from the county government perspective. What kind of initiatives could be started to respond to the traumatic stress brought on by racial tensions and also just mental health issues in the Black community and communities of color that often feel negated? I, as a Latinx man, have had access to sufficient healthcare coverage and mental health services for the first time in my life, and yet it still has been difficult to find affordable therapy and treatment options for mental health issues such as anxiety and depression due to the compounded stress of not only having to deal with daily life, but also with the injustice and many inequities many of us are fighting against right now. What can we as a county do to help in this respect, not only for our coworkers, but also the community at large?
Yeah. Why don't you talk first, Susan, what the county is doing, if any?
Yeah. So one of my roles is actually oversight of behavioral health contracts for the community, and one of the things that we are implementing is using the racial equity tool that GARE has provided us. There are 6 questions that are going to be guiding our decisions on where we're investing dollars, and to ensure that we are better supporting communities of color to have access to affordable behavioral health care. And that has been implemented. We are starting to use those questions in our decisions. The other thing that we are using is data across the county to understand where are there gaps in service delivery, and where do we really want to target some of those dollars to make sure that there is adequate capacity in those areas for communities that have not had access to those services previously. And then, part of the GARE tool addresses this, but I think one of the things that we have seen as a pretty large gap is bilingual and bicultural therapists. And so really thinking and working with providers on recruitment strategies to ensure that there are not only culturally appropriate services provided, but that the people providing it are able to speak the preferred language of the person seeking services and are bicultural as well.
Yeah, that's great, Susan. And I will just also give a plug. So the treatment team at Mental Health Partners that I direct also is called Moving Beyond Trauma. That's a trauma-focused treatment team. And I'm very happy and relieved to say that we just hired a bilingual, bicultural therapist who has background and skill in working with traumatic stress, and so that's good. So just know that at least it's one resource at Mental Health Partners. I mean, I'm sure with the demand, it's just going to get full fast, but I agree. We do offer that. We have someone with that capability and skill set.
Right. Well, again, we have about a minute, and I see that we were able to access the video, so I want to end on that note, but I want to thank Dr. Janine D'Anniballe again. Janine, you're just such an asset to our community. Appreciate you so much and all of the wisdom you bring, Again, thank you to everyone who posted all of your own wisdom and sharing the vulnerability of this time. And I just appreciate the conversation so much and normalizing the experience that we're all going through, again, to varying degrees. So thank you again, and we will finish with this video.
All right, ready?
Oh, it doesn't sound like there's sound. So we'll send this link out with the sound. So all right, we'll send this out with the sound, everybody. It's funny even without the sound.